All right, here we go. Let's unlock some functional movement in yoga. So, why functional movement? So, I'm a big believer in the why. So, like, I could tell you these concepts and these things, and at the end of the day, if you don't know why, it doesn't matter, right? We need to know the why of things. Um, at its heart, the asana practice. So, when I'm speaking of yoga, I'm being very specific about talking about the asana practice, not its big realms of spirituality, religion, philosophy, all the things that come with yoga since, before common era. I'm just talking about the asana practice. And anytime you're moving your body, it's considered exercise, regardless of what our opinion around it is. The systems in the body doesn't know the difference between a lunge in a yoga class or a lunge in a gym or a lunge out in your garden, right? It's still the same body mechanics happening. So we want to look at the bodily movement like that falls under the umbrella of exercise science and physiology and use what we know about it, especially since it has come so far since like the 1970s, 80s, even 90s. This science has really just skyrocketed. So the asana practice as we know it, I've done a deep dive into historical academic text on the lineage and the history of yoga. And the poses we tend to see in today's modern yoga asana practice were developed between 1890 and 1960. And there's a historical context here as to why that's important. Right, most of the poses pre-1890 were seated postures, which we don't see as much of unless it's a more gentle style class. But in our vinyasa and hatha classes, you have anywhere from 40 to 50 minutes of standing postures. During this time period, they did their best, right? They did what they could with what they had, but they were not movement experts and did not have the technology or science we have today. So like CT scans, MRIs, a lot of stuff did not get developed until sometime between the 50s and 70s and was not used in a clinical way for this type of science well into the 80s or 90s. Also, the asana practice was first started, they were inspired by movements from gymnastics and bodybuilding. So we can find that literature, we can find those reports. So know that a lot of the asana poses and the alignment cues given for traditional yoga poses were from this idea of doing gymnastics or doing bodybuilding. And I will go to say that 99% of the people who come to our classes are not interested in being a professional gymnast or a professional bodybuilder. That's not what they're in our classes to do. They're not our target client. So we really have to kind of mold the how we teach to fit the people we have in front of us. And then this one is really important. The asanas were mostly developed and practiced by young men. So, and even children. So when you looked at the ashrams, and especially in like Mysore and those areas in the late 1890s, early 1900s up to 1930, many of the yoga practitioners were up to young as the age of 12. We are not 12-year-old boys. For the most part, the people coming into our classes are women and adults. So our bodies are very, very different. And they haven't been practicing since they were 12-year-old boys. So they don't have this background in their body. It's like if we had been doing gymnastics since we were 12, we would all be very good at this as well. The average lifespan in India in 1960 was 39 years. And in 1930, the average lifespan was 25. So during the time of asana practice, it was young boys and men. So again, we have to look at the bodies we're working with today, and they don't match where these old traditional cues and alignment and even forms possibly came from. We're just not there anymore. Okay. What happens if I click? Okay. You guys can still see my screen, yes? I feel like Zoom has like different buttons every single time I get on here. All right. So let's look real quick at the bigger umbrella. So an exercise science is an umbrella that covers a bunch of different subfields. And we're today just going to talk about functional movement, but I want to preface the other ones because they do intertwine and are very important to look at, right? So anatomy provides information about the structure of the body. If you think about a car, you took a car apart and you could point to the engine and say, I know the engine runs the car in some form or fashion. You could point to the wheel and I'm like, I know that's where the base of the car sits on to moves it. But that's it. If you don't put them together, you don't have a car. So anatomy is important yet overrated in yoga. Like it does you no good to know what to be able to point to a femur bone. So what, right? We need to know the physiology, which provides information about how the structures interact with the rest of the bodily systems. Again, the skeletal system won't do anything without the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, and a lot of other things. Physics describes force and mass. So again, knowing a femur bone means nothing if you don't know what it does in space, which is relative basically to gravity. And that's where biomechanics comes from. I will have, so if you wanted to rewatch the video, I have some definitions for all those things a little bit deeper, but let's talk about functional movement. So functional movement refers to movements that are natural, efficient, and mimic everyday activity or sport-specific actions. So for the everyday person, there are functional movements for us to perform. Like they can be squatting, pulling, pushing. These are functional movements. Also, if you are going to do something very specific, like football players have very specific exercises they do that are very functional for their sport-specific movement. So I don't want to separate out that it's only everyday activities that the average person. It is also sport-specific as well, and that's where you could get into like yoga for runners, yoga for wrestlers, that kind of thing. But you would need to know what the functional movements of that sport is to really have an impact on the sport itself. So functional movements involve multiple muscle groups and joints working together to produce coordinated, efficient, and purposeful movement. The goal of the movement is to enhance strength, stability, and mobilities that improve performance in daily life or athletic tasks. So at its heart, functional movement is selecting exercises and patterns that improve specific outcomes outside of the exercise. So instead of like for fitness or strength building, we're like, I'm gonna do bicep curls because I want bicep curls to be easier because I want the bicep to look a certain way, is not a functional movement. The movements you do in functional movement need to be able to point to something outside of the movement itself. We're doing this so that over there is easier, right? And it should be based on the structure, function, and the purpose of the body. What was that joint actually built to do? So when you call a pose, cue it up and put it into a sequence, ask yourself, what is the outcome you're looking for outside of the pose that enhances what the body's job is, right? So being able to look at a pose and know what the primary joint movements are, right? What muscles are causing those joint movements and where you see those outside of the yoga mat is a way to think about functional movement in yoga. All right, I'm going to skip these for the sake of time, but they're just bigger definitions of the other umbrellas. So let's look at some of the primary things. So we're going to talk about the first 5, and then there are 3 more that I haven't put in here for the sake of time. But when you look at functional movement, you're going to look at coordination, flexibility, mobility, stability, balance. Then there's also joint position, efficiency, and timing. I go into those in some of my other trainings that I offer that are a deeper dive. Okay. All right, so let's talk about coordination first. So the body parts and muscles. So for this example, the muscles, we're calling them players. They don't work alone, right? So look, if you're trying to do something to target the quadricep or the bicep, there's no way to actually do that. It's just not possible. That's not how it works. You have a prime mover. So like in a bicep curl or in a lunge, the back leg, right? The prime mover in the lunge is the glute, and the hamstring is helping. Those are the agonists. That's what you contract to create the movement. And then there are stabilizers, right? So the little bitty muscles in your pelvis, the muscles in your ankles are stabilizing and helping the prime mover. The antagonists are the opposing muscles that are relaxing to allow it to move. So the quadricep opposes the hamstring. The bicep opposes the tricep. So how coordination is involved and where it becomes impaired, and these are ways to look at when you're teaching yoga and your clients or students, where you might be able to help them is there a player just not playing? It's just not in the game, right? So this could be due to injury. So you simply have a torn tendon, ligament, a muscle strain, a broken bone. The player is not in the game for injury or inactivation, what can often happen after injury. So I am coming off of a lot of ankle issues. And in my right leg, I had a high ankle sprain and a chip in my ankle bone. And it was injured. And then after it actually healed itself, it was still inactive because it just didn't want to play anymore. So much so that it inactivated my inner right thigh. So all the muscles running on the inside of my right leg literally were not firing. Like the nervous system connections were not there. And I had to do specific work to activate it. Know that most of the people coming into your classes, because we sit all day, their glutes are inactive in some form or fashion. So part of coordination is like figuring out in the average human what's typically inactive. Our hamstrings are inactive from sitting in a shortened position. Our glutes are inactive. Our core trunk stabilizers are inactive. Our back muscles are inactive because they're always flexed. So being able to teach to that. The second was a player not cooperating. So creating improper movement you just don't want. When the body convinces itself that the pelvis is neutral, but you can clearly see the left side is 20 degrees higher than the right. But the body's muscles are just creating that improper movement for whatever reason. Or the player's not appropriate, play in the appropriate position. This is very common. So often, because our glutes are deactive, because we sit so much and our pelvis is not stable, the hamstrings are trying to do the pelvis's job, which is why hamstrings are notoriously hard to lengthen or stretch. Because they're like, we can't stretch. If we stretch, you'll fall over because your pelvis isn't doing its job, so we're going to do that job instead. So when a player's not playing in an appropriate position. So what this can look like in teaching is cueing postures based on muscular action versus anatomical alignment, right? Instead of saying, bring the hip to 90 degrees and put the left foot here and the right foot here in a lunge, you'll actually say, press the back leg up, contract the right glute, contract the right hamstring, and then pull that leg forwards towards the pelvis, right? So creating these muscle actions that you may not be able to visually see, but one person not doing that versus a person doing that, they may look completely the same. They are having a completely different experience. Not quite cooperating, improper movement, cue in a way that helps them learn new proprioception, right? So they can learn when the body is confused. So I will often say to someone, like, feel how your body feels right now and know that you're leaning sideways 20 degrees, even though you feel like you're straight. Help them get straight and then be like, now remember this. Tell the brain this is straight, right? Remaking those new proprioception connections. A player not playing the appropriate position, this is when you need to help them turn on the appropriate muscles. So you can use props. I'm going to do a couple of examples of this to force the muscle to contract that needs to be contracting, which will allow the muscle that is not supposed to be working to relax. Okay, so that's coordination. So these are examples I'm gonna go over in real life and show you guys, but I just want to put them here so you see them. I'm going to come back to them and show them to you. All right, flexibility. So we cannot, flexibility is about a joint, not about a muscle. So muscles, when you talk about muscles, you can talk about the length of a muscle. You don't necessarily talk about the flexibility of the muscle. You talk about the flexibility of the joint. Like you can't flex your bicep. You flex your elbow. So the range of any joint is flexibility, and it's measuring passive range. So if I were to lay down and let my leg be pushed to my nose by another person, I got from A to B. From A to B, that range is flexibility, right? So it's just the range of motion. Whereas mobility is that range of motion that you have control over. More flexibility tends to lead to more injury. What you need is more mobility. So can I get my knee to my nose laying on my back without touching my leg? My ability to move my leg from laying on the ground to my face, that range of motion, that mobility in the hip and the pelvis, that's what that is mobility. Having someone else push the leg closer to my face is flexibility. Flexibility does not help me in time of crisis. Time of crisis is tripping, rolling an ankle, falling, lifting something up that's too heavy, catching something unexpected. Like mobility is what allows you to not get injured, not flexibility. Almost all injuries are actually a muscle or ligament or tendon overstretching in a millisecond. The injury happens because there's so much stretch available. So we're really looking for mobility. So because increased flexibility without proper mobility can weaken a muscle's ability to produce force. So more flexible runners who are more flexible run slower, right? Power lifters have more flexibility, can lift less. Flexibility slows us down and gives us less power. And let's take a look at what it looks like. So what you'll see when this ankle rolls, don't worry so much about what they're saying, but when the ankle rolls, it's a matter of the flexibility, the lax tendons, or what's causing that roll, the ligament.
Ankle sprains are among the most common injuries to the lower extremity. These are a result of a fall or misstep during ambulation and sporting related episodes. This injury is classically observed as an inversion injury at
That's
the ankle and
flexibility.
subtalar joint of the foot, whereby several structures may be injured. The anterior talofibular ligament rupture is seen with a positive anterior drawer sign in the lateral radiographic view, whereby the talus will protrude from the ankle joint. Likewise, an injury to the calcaneal fibular ligament will result in a positive talar tilt seen between the alignment of the tibial plafond and the talar dome.
So the more flexible you are, the more your joints have the laxity to do that, the more they're set up to do that. And then when you miscalculate step and placement, they're more likely to do that. And that's what causes tears and sprains. Okay. So let's talk about it in a yoga class. Start to teach poses both in transition and holding that has them increase their mobility over flexibility. Here's the thing, if you increase mobility, flexibility has to be there. But you don't need flexibility past your range of mobility. There's no way to not have, like, the flexibility has to come along. There is no mobility without flexibility, but there is flexibility without mobility. So some examples I'm going to give you is like new ways to do side lunge, also known as Skandasana, half pigeon, completely change how you do half pigeon, and then different ways to stretch hamstrings that is not like forward fold. All right, stability. This is the ability to prevent unwanted motion. So in general, our trunk, so your trunk is from your collarbone down both sides to your pelvis. Their job is to control motion, often to prevent unwanted movement. That's what they're there to do, which means we need to not stretch those guys out, right? We need to create them to actually be a little bit tighter and less flexible because their job is to prevent motion. Could you imagine walking down the street and as you walk, your entire trunk is just kind of like all over the place, twisting and turning and flexing and extending? No, those muscles are meant to hold you still. Because we want to move our extremities, head, arms, and legs. That's what you want to think about moving. It's that idea of you cannot shoot a cannon out of a canoe, right? Because the cannon shoots and the canoe flies backwards. Without stability, you cannot have coordination. So this is going to be the idea of teaching, cueing to stability first, then creating the mobility and the range of motion around stability and not allowing for compensations. Like if I want to get my legs straighter, I'm not going to flex my spine completely to make it happen because that my leg is actually not gaining any mobility. I'm asking the trunk to be super mobile to get my legs straight, and that's not its job. Wrong player. Don't send the first baseman to outfield, right? Okay. I'm going to skip through this so we can, I want to do more actual exercises for you guys to see them. So the biggest piece to teach stability is to really teach about the transitioning. So really get people to transition into the postures in a way that once they get there, there's really not a lot of left to say to try to fix what went wrong in the transition, right? You're setting them up to functionally move into the pose versus getting into the pose and then being like, oh, okay, everyone's trying to fall over now and I've got to fix that situation. So when you look at stability, you want to teach from the center out. There's way too much fixation on hands and feet, whereas we need to teach from pelvis, core, and thoracic area out eventually to the hands and feet. Because if you can get the thoracic area and the pelvis where it needs to be, and then the core middle to connect those two things, your hands and feet will end up where they need to be, which is going to be different for everybody. Also being able to look at postures and say, okay, the left side has got to stabilize so the right side can move. Or the top half of the body has to stabilize for the bottom to move and vice versa. Or the front part of the body has to stabilize for the back side to move and vice versa. So looking at postures in that way. And again, we'll do these are some of the examples we will work through. Just a minute here. And then finally is base of support and center of mass. This is a huge missing piece, especially when you feel like someone just can't quite get it. They can't quite balance, they can't quite get there. And it could be that where their center of mass or center of gravity is not lined up with their base of support. And if they simply move body position, it will all fall into place. Right? So the biggest example is if I do this and I'm like, I know that I want to leave the top lock on top of the bottom and I just keep doing that. Physics is never going to let that happen. But if I put the base of support where the center of mass is, it's going to stay there all day long. And so this is great. And this
Center
video,
of gravity
Oh,
and
sorry.
base of support. Have you ever wondered how we maintain balance while walking, running, or simply standing still? Our ability to maintain balance or stability is primarily dependent on the relationship between the body's center of gravity and its base of support. Let's dive into these two concepts. The center of gravity, COG. The center of gravity, COG, is a point in space where the entire body's mass behaves as if it is concentrated there. The center of gravity varies from person to person, but on average, when standing upright, it is located in the body midline in front of the lumbar vertebrae, L1, 2, 3. However, this point can shift depending on an individual's body shape, posture, and position. For instance, when you bend forward or backward, your center of gravity moves accordingly. The base of support, BOS. The body's base of support, BOS, refers to the area or part of the body that is in contact with the supporting surface, such as the ground or a floor. Were you to trace the outline of the body where it touches the ground, you would define the base of support. It is the foundation that provides stability and balance to the body when standing or performing various movements. For example, the wider the stance when standing, the larger the base of support becomes, whereas a narrow stance reduces the size of the base of support.
This is where you want to look at tradition, bring your feet to touch. Our skeleton's not made for that. So I never ask anyone to ever bring their feet together in any posture.
This is why it's challenging to maintain weight distribution when standing with feet close together, as it requires keeping the center of gravity on a small support base. What happens when we lose balance? Losing balance occurs when the body's center of gravity moves outside the base of support, which significantly affects the ability to maintain balance. When this happens, two options arise, either falling to the ground or taking a step forward to increase the base of support. Low center of gravity versus high center of gravity. Another crucial factor influencing balance is the distance between your center of gravity and your base of support. The rule here is simple. The lower your center of gravity, the more stable you are. And conversely, the higher your center of gravity is, the less stable you are, and the easier it is to topple over if pushed. Low center of gravity, sumo wrestler. In sumo wrestling, wrestlers purposefully lower their center of gravity by adopting a deep, wide-legged stance. This low center of gravity and increased base of support provide exceptional stability, making it incredibly challenging for opponents to push and topple them over during a match. High center of gravity, tiptoe balancing. When balancing on tiptoes, the center of gravity is much higher above the ground, making it prone to instability. Maintaining stability requires constant effort and control. Balancing on tiptoes vividly demonstrates how a high center of gravity increases instability and the risk of toppling over compared to a lower center of gravity stance.
So what's also important when you look at this here is that force is our muscle contractions, and it's also what we call load, right? So load changes regardless of our body weight. So over here, if I was to do like a Malasana yogi squat, the load within my joints, especially my spine, is very minimal. But if I come up on my tippy toes, the load in my spine can be as high as 10-fold more, even though my weight hasn't changed, simply because my base of support has changed. So you're gonna look at that. So for example, if you are in a warrior 3 and have your hands at your hips or at your chest, right? And then you extend them overhead parallel to the ground, you have put an excess amount of load both in the tops of the shoulders and in the lower back, because that's where the base of support is, in a forward, 90-degree angle at the hip. And to what benefit, right? There's really no benefit. So I don't teach anything with the arms out alongside the ears, parallel to the ground. Okay. So I'm going to talk about both base of support and center of mass and these poses, but I like to think about, like, you could look at yoga as nothing more than moving your base of support around and keeping your center of gravity so you don't fall. Because that is what we do in life. Movement is moving your base of support around and not falling, because gravity wants you to fall every second of every day. So all you're doing in yoga is getting better at that in different planes of motion using different body parts. All right, any quick questions before we get into the movement piece? You can just unmute yourself and ask. It may make more sense once we start kind of moving around. Okay, all right, I just gotta do a quick little transition here. And hope that you guys can still hear me when I get back here. All right. I'm gonna talk loud. You feel good? Alicia, you're the only one I can see right now. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna start back with the coordination piece, and I have my little cheat notes up here. So a player not playing. So one of the major players just in general, when anyone comes into your class that, well, I don't know any human that's not sitting for an inappropriate amount of time, whether it's in their job or not. And even if their job, they're not sitting, they're doing some other things that are repetitive and unnecessary. So turning the glutes on, these are the most deactivated part of our body, and they are the largest body mass we have in muscle. So we have to turn them on. So two things you can do: you can add skills work and you can teach to it. So one of the things I love to do, and if any of you guys are able to do it with me, that's great. If not, you can practice it in the beginning of class. So I do really dynamic warm-ups to make sure I go through ranges of motion. You can do simple glute lifts. So when I lay down, and normally it would look like this, so I'm completely relaxed, I would just have the person lift one leg to a hover and contract the glute. So the only thing really holding the leg up back here is my glute. And I'll hold it, right? I may even have my phone to count 30 seconds or so, and then go to the other side and contract. So this is a really great way to get a player involved that needs to be involved. And I like putting it at the beginning of class, because then when I go to teach to it later, they can remember that, because they're not trying, like, they're not falling over laid on the ground. So you can speak to the thing and then carry it over as you teach. A place to carry it over is in all of your lunge style poses. So kneeling lunge, the leg that's behind me. And I'm pretty sure I have my thing reversed so I can speak to right leg. So my right leg is back, but it's the leg that's behind. In this lunge, you're not just hanging out. The cue is to contract the right glute, contract the right hamstring, and then push into the back foot to send the pelvis forwards. And this is also a center of mass situation. So if you have someone here, the center of mass, the center of gravity is the hip over the knee. That knee is not happy. I'm really uncomfortable right now. It's painful. It's not good. I'm not going to lie. And the easiest way to help someone come out of that is to simply shift to the center of mass. So now it's in between the two legs, and I can actually use this heel. So if I press into this heel, contract this hamstring, the knee's bent, right? So it's hamstrings that flex the knee. This can help hold me, and then I get back in here, contract the glute, I never have people put their foot down flat. This is a missed opportunity. Push into it. We do not use our feet in everyday motions like this. Our ankles don't operate well here. Functional movement is to teach almost every single pose with a flexed ankle versus a pointed toe. Right, so I can literally do nothing. Now I'm contracting, hamstring, glute, pushing. My form didn't change, completely different posture though, and what's happening in my body, right? So that's the difference in teaching functionally versus alignment based where you're stacking body parts. All right, so coordinating, getting the glutes to start playing some games. Same thing, high lunge, the back leg needs to be the leg holding you, not the front quad. Warrior two, this back leg, this glute holding you, this hamstring holding you, not the front quad. Right, so getting this player involved is going to make a huge impact. Not cooperating, so neutral pelvis. So a lot of it, you'll see, I'll try for eagle pose. When people come over to eagle pose, right, the pelvis will kind of do this a lot of times. And it's because we do a lot of this standing. So pelvis neutral is not something your body's used to doing. It's used to hitching. And it doesn't want to cooperate. It's like, no, this is what we do in life, right? And I know you're not going to stand up well like this, but we're going to do this. So getting people to get the pelvis, the signals, nerve signals, motor units to cooperate, define, like not being worried about wrapping this foot. It has nothing to do with functional movement to get that foot behind my calf. Absolutely nothing. We don't do that in life. We do not try to get a foot behind the other foot. There's not a movement in life that we ever do that, right? But keeping our pelvis level as we get up and down and walk is something we very much do. So here is getting that to cooperate. If you have a question, unmute yourself and just holler it out. Okay, let's see. Okay, so something taking over. So one thing that takes over is our hamstrings. When the pelvis is not stable, its job is to keep us from falling over. The hamstrings take over, which is why people always feel tight in their hamstrings. So one way to deactivate the hamstrings, so you can work on the pelvis, I love to do this in forward folds, put blocks under your knees, and then you can start like moving the pelvis around, right? So I'm tilting the pelvis up, tilting the pelvis down. I can get situated on my sit bones. Pelvis is neutral. Forward fold. It has to depend on mobility of the pelvis to make it happen. Hamstrings with these blocks underneath cannot get involved in the party. And then you can start to translate this to standing up. So I have stopped doing ragdoll this way. And then people want to swing around. And the pelvis is like, oh my God, I just don't want you to not fall over. Stop doing that. I put the blocks here. You know, some people need it for their hands or elbows. And then really bend the knees and teach people to hug in. Right, to really squeeze left and right in the pelvis joint to create this lift and this fold. All right, let's see what I have happen. I think I have someone trying to hop in. All right, any questions? So that was the coordination piece. Like the players needing to play the right role, needing to be activated, needing to sit aside where they don't need to play. Anybody can unmute themselves and just ask. Good? All right, we're gonna move on to
Actually, Gina, can you hear me okay?
I can't.
It's Diana speaking. So I'm trying to take notes and make sense of it in my own head while reviewing the cues that I give and why I give them. So thank you for challenging that. Appreciate it. A little bit more on the pelvis. So the pelvis's job is to keep you stable, keep you from falling over.
Yep.
Yes? Okay. So, and the hamstrings playing to that, how?
Our pelvis, our core muscles, our pelvic floor, right? The pelvic floor runs all the way down through the pelvis. The transverse innervates the pelvis. The hip flexors are very important in the pelvis being stable. We're always in sit-in position, so the flexors are always locked short and weak. Though for those reasons, our pelvis is not very good at stabilizing us. So the hamstrings are what's attached to the pelvis first on the backside. So they tighten up to help keep us from falling over because the pelvis is not giving 100%.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for
Welcome.
connecting the dots.
Yeah. So anytime you hear people just be like, my hamstrings are tight, my hamstrings are so tight, stop trying to stretch the hamstrings and start stabilizing the pelvis. And the hamstrings will probably just relax. That's all it is. Right? Kind of like if you have a significant other and they're like, relax, relax, and be like, well, fucking do something to help me out, and I'll relax. Think about it that way. All right, mobility versus flexibility. Here's going to be the biggest example of that. Let me just turn sideways. So I call side lunge. I don't teach the Sanskrit, but it's known as Skandasana. If I put my hands down, I'm now assisted. This will be passive stretching. Here I am. And where I feel the sensation is in the back of my knee and where my femur bone attaches to my ball and socket in the pelvis. And the tendons and ligaments are taking the brunt of that action. It's passive. I have flexible range of motion to get there. And if I was to fall, I would probably do a split and get there, but chances are tear something in the process. Mobility is, can I get there with the muscles who are supposed to get me there? My hands are not supposed to get my hips that low. My hands are not supposed to stretch my legs. I do not feel it in my pelvis anymore. I do not feel it in my knee anymore. I feel it in my muscles. This section in the middle between my hip and knee, and now you can maybe hear it in my voice. I'm struggling a lot. And so what's happening now, when we come out, is what's called an active stretch, where the muscles have to contract and lengthen at the same time, versus a passive stretch, where the muscle is relaxed and lengthening. Active stretching is what prevents injuries. Passive stretching is what leads to injuries. So that's the clearest example of mobility over flexibility. So whenever I teach this posture, people are only allowed to go as low as they can without putting their hands on the ground. Another example is half pigeon. So our joints are best in their neutral position and neutral standing, just the way we're made. This is neutral, so this is where we work from. Then each joint has its ability to be at its best in a power way. So at what angle can I put a joint and it has enough force built up in it to power me out of it? In the hip joint, it's about 90 to 110 degrees. Okay, so this is 90. If my hands come down, I'm making that, right, a bigger range. So this, between here and here, are the best possible in order for me to still use my hip joint to get out of it. As soon as I come down here, this hip, this muscle, can no longer lift me up. And all the load is put into this overstretched back area. So lizard's a perfect example, right? Lizard postures. Anytime you drop lower than here, you're no longer doing a functional movement, right? I want to be able to use this leg to power me up, right? Use this leg to get me up. As soon as we get down here, I'm no longer building any strength or stability or even mobility of this hip. I'm passively stretching it. Same thing goes with coming down here. So I did this last month. And 100% of people in my classes have told me they've had their hips have never felt better. So we did half pigeon with the back leg lifted, the blocks in our hands lifted, and squeeze the knees towards each other to the point where some people started playing with this after a couple weeks. Now I am strengthening, right? So my pelvis is neutral. I'm making my pelvic floor, my pelvis muscles lift me away from the floor. And I'm in a very mobile state, right? The back leg, this hip flexor is very mobile. So by the way, your hip flexor attaches from your femur bone to your pelvis to your lower back. The lower your body goes, the less you're doing in your hip flexor. You're literally taking the stretch out of it by going down. This is where the stretch happens, because I'm moving where it's attached closer to the muscle, there's no stretch there. Instead, when I go down, I put load on the external rotators of my body pushing through because gravity is trying to get me down. So instead, I'm going to externally rotate. The leg is going to adduct in, and then I'm going to pull up. So this is pretty much how, and if we do more of a relaxed half pigeon, you don't let anyone take the chest, the belly button below the hip. Because we're just moving into that overstretching place where I lose stability. And people should be able to just pop up really easy into high plank and switch it out. Nothing has changed, I just have one leg in front of me. So that's a huge difference between increasing stability and mobility versus just trying to stretch it out with flexibility. We do yen here. That's for like deep fascia stretching, but I'd have like 4 blocks and a bolster. So gravity is not playing any part of it. And then like a real simple hamstring stretch. I do this all the time, is instead of like this, super passive, I just simply make them hold their leg up. Active hamstring stretch, right? And if they want to go deeper, they gotta make it happen, right? Versus pulling on it. And that's gonna really increase their range of mobility more than anything else. All right, so that's the mobility piece. Any questions on that before we move on? Kind of the mobility and stability goes together, so it kind of intertwined a little bit. I keep an eye on time. Just unmute yourself if you have a question.
So just one question. Well, I guess probably this is my second question.
I think you guys have a lot of questions, but you're just not sure where to go.
Is there ever a time then, because I teach all the different forms, is there ever a time when deep stretch is deep stretch? Or for example, if I've got the class in half sleeping pigeon, is that not useful in a deep stretch class?
I would say, but question is it useful in life? That's just where I come from.
Okay.
Yeah, is it useful in life?
All righty, thank you.
Yeah. Because most people don't have a hard time putting themselves in odd position and laying down on the floor. Most people have a hard time getting themselves back off the floor. All right, so stability. Eagle pose. It's notoriously a difficult pose for people. And what you're going to look for is what can be done here before you start kind of wrapping all this stuff around. Okay, so I will often just teach, like, come into a chair posture, and then, like, you know, bring the pelvis neutral. Pull the front of the pelvis, the muscles up. So pulling the front of the pelvis bones up is not tucking the tailbone under. Each individual piece of your pelvis can move slightly versus an entire change in orientation, right? So pulling up, pulling the ribs closer together to contract here, then pushing the shoulder blades into the body. And then I have people do their arms first, right? Because the arms attach to their thoracic area. So get really stable. The upper part needs to be completely stable. So just really look at top to bottom, stabilize the top, then have them start to maneuver around, right? So that's a kind of a top to bottom situation. And people who really still don't get like the amount of the effort that needs, I'm like in full on sweating here now. The amount of effort needed in the upper body is to, you know, have them put their hands on a block and pull the block into them so that the back muscles contract. Like you want that in any standing posture, you want your posterior line. So from your heel to your calf, to your hamstring, back of your pelvis, up your back and rectus spinae, your posterior line is the thing that is holding you. Right, so having people do these standing postures with a block will teach them, right? So this is where I may go way off the traditional yoga rails. I mean, I just take all the arms out of it completely. because we really in general don't have like mobility issues in our reach in everyday life. Like we're using our arms pretty regularly. It's our lower body we don't use regularly. Take that out of the game. Teach trunk stability. Go through an entire standing series, right? Where their upper body's just not moving. And see how mobile they are below. Boat pose. Anytime I call boat, it's just generally known in our studio, you start in a supported boat. So you pop your toes up, your heels are down, and have them put their hands on the outside of their legs. So not grip or hold, but on the outside. Press the legs into the hands into the leg, but that is going to turn on everything in your pelvis and get on your sit bones. Then you can come back as long as you don't dump into your lower back. Any changes you make need to be made without the trunk moving. Right, so teach the stability before you start teaching mobility. And then let them play around with that. And then legs, like instead of rushing, especially if you teach a vinyasa style, one breath when movement is overrated, let it be a couple of breaths. I will often cue, if I have them step from down dog, right, top out, I know just call it, say take your time, like left foot forward, come up to crescent lunge, but I'm like, do not move until you can press your heel down. You can contract your back and hamstring, lift up, pull the pelvis in, and you basically can get rid of your hands and nothing happens. Then push yourself up with your legs. Right? Same thing if I was to do warrior one. You don't release your base of support until you put it clearly between your 2 feet, and it doesn't even matter. This will also prevent people from like doing this loading up the front leg to get up. So allowing, they still do your dry breath the whole time that's happening. Who cares if it's one breath or 3 dry breaths, as long as they're doing, and that's what makes yoga different from pure exercise, is our attempt to control our breathing versus letting the nervous system just keep us alive. All right, center of mass, base of support. We are making excellent time. So let's just talk about crow pose. This is a perfect example of the blocks. So if someone gets here and is simply scared of rocking forwards, right, my base of support is my hands and my feet. My center of gravity is over my heels. I do not care how magically strong I am. I cannot lift my feet and expect to balance. Physics and gravity will not allow it. I must shift my center of mass over my hands, so that in reality, the only thing on the floor right now are my big toes. They're not even a part of the base of support, so I can lift them. So it doesn't matter how strong someone can be in arm balancing. If the center of mass is not over the base of support, it will never fucking happen. It just won't. So, and having someone put their head on another base of support just creates that problem somewhere else. Right, so if I have them go, just put your head down, you're just training bases of support, but now it's on your cervical spine. Right, so don't have that happen. Plus you want them to move out, not down. It's not a teeter-totter move. It's a forwards and backwards move. Okay. If people are struggling in supported in airplane pose, I love allowing for, right? So we saw this in the demo. I'm standing up. My center of mass is coming out now, and there's no joints down here. So now my lower back will grab unless I say contract your hamstrings and glutes to hold you. Then my lower back can relax. But if people need that extra support to do that, bring them to this base of support, and then have them shift into their heels, squeeze their hamstrings, squeeze their glutes, get the thoracic spine lined up, and then one at a time, right? You want to take them up the airplane. Or you can even do it here. And then have them go one arm at a time. Slowly shifting the base of support as you coach what to contract so that when you move the base of support, the body doesn't move. Instead, a muscle group grabs. All right. That was a lot. Any general questions, or I have a couple minutes if you have any postures you would like some demo around any of these concepts. And maybe you're not sure what the concept is, but you're just like, what would you do with this posture? Throw it at me, let's see. Don't let it overwhelm you.
Anything special to know about triangle?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's one of my favorites. So for a triangle pose, this is where you look at top and bottom situation, right? So my base of support is between my 2 feet. My legs are straight. The straighter your legs, the less range of motion you have in your pelvis. Like, you know, when you dance, you don't, you bend your knees and you move your pelvis, right? So here, if you go in a triangle with both straight legs, your pelvis is pretty fixed because your knees are fixed. And so what's really happening is the femur bone, so this leg, this femur bone, and this pelvis are fighting against each other, the ball and socket, and you can actually have hip impingement here, right? Because you're just trying to move the whole unit with no bend. And then when the spine and the ribs get stuck, like we just don't move like that, right? So I always have people go from warrior 2, take their hand down, give yourself an extra base of support with the block, so then you can move your pelvis back. So instead of trying to fix the pelvis and knees and then move, like, my base of support doesn't want to move this way. It's like, you're not moving your lower body. Why are we doing this? Why are we going this way? That's not how we go. Like, I don't do this to reach for something. I like reach for something, right? So bend the knee. So then you can come down, and I haven't changed my center of mass, but I'm going to now by moving the pelvis back. And I have a base of support to help. And you're going to feel so much freer in your spine because now your pelvis is in a position it needs to be in, with this pelvis, part of your pelvis lining up with this knee and this ankle, and this pelvis with this knee and this ankle. And we never want to pull this pelvis back and over because the knee is not going back and over. Pelvis, knee, and ankle need to follow each other to protect the knee joint. So it's this way, not this way. This is the easiest way to get to the sciatic nerve underneath. Just try it. You'll realize, like, I really can't breathe here. Now I can breathe. Because I was jamming up all of this, trying to make my pelvis go in a direction it doesn't go. Like, we don't do this. Right? That give you about 3 things, Diana? Anyone else? All right, so I have, like, so that would have been, if I had broken all that stuff down, that probably would have been about 10 or 15 videos inside the training hub. So my training hub videos, some of them are longer, like this will be in the training hub. But Mastering Functional Yoga starts in 2 weeks. It's a Sunday. I do have an online option. It will be 5 meetings, 4 hours long, really breaking this down and how to sequence for peak actions. Like, I can just write a whole sequence to be like, only point of this month is to get people's asses engaged. So I'm going to write a sequence where the peak pose is going to require them to contract their glute. And if they don't contract their glute, they can't do it. And then I'm going to sequence up to that peak pose and peak posture. And then I'll carry that into next month. Like, don't forget about your glute this next month. We're going to work on the inner thighs, but don't forget about your glute. Right? How to put skills work in. So my warm up, I do like it's a sequence. Like, we need to write sequences where people are getting up and down off the mat instead of being like on the mat, transition off the mat, and then back down to the mat. That's not how life is. We're up and down, up and down, up and down. Like, how can you teach people to learn how to stand up better off the floor? Because at some point in your life, that's going to be a problem if you don't. If you would like to join me for that, I'm giving people a little kind of a discount code. It'll be an email that I send to you guys. It's only good through this week. And other than that, just let me know if you have questions. And thank you guys. I'm like a full on sweat. Thank you guys for joining me. Anybody have anything before we hop off? I've got like 2 or 3 minutes.
Thank you. It was very good.
Thank you, Nicole. See, I see a couple of chats. Let me just see what that is. I couldn't see it from back there. Oh, thank you guys. Thank you so much. All right, have an amazing day, and hit me up if you need anything, and go check me out either at the Training Hub, or if you want to do Mastering Functional Yoga. I also do one-on-one mentoring. If you'd like to do that, we can work on some specifics. All right, have a great day.